I'm pretty sure that some of you guys didn't expect me to do a review of Invincible, mainly episode 2 that was released earlier this year. And by the looks of watching the last episode and this episode, I have to say that this show is one of the next cartoons that are ranked as one of the best of this decade so far. Granted, I've only watched the first 2 episodes, but after watching people's perspective on this show and the fact that they actually adore this show more than anything else that they've seen, I have to admit that this show really had a cult following once it premiered its episodes of this year. I really think that everything about this episode will make me appreciate the characters. The reason why I'm reviewing this episode and not the first episode is because we get to see more of the characters after the aftermath of the first episode. And when I mean aftermath, I mean of Omni-Man completely killing his sidekicks. In other words, the Guardians who completely protect everything from evil. And if you really think that that's really something that you do not want to mess with, then you pretty much don't even know how graphic this show is. If you did watch the first episode at least. Now, I'm not going to show all the graphic imagery in the show because otherwise this video will be blocked when it comes to graphic imagery and mostly breaking the guidelines of YouTube. So I'm going to try to show you the graphic imagery to a minimum, mainly TV-14 ratings of graphic imagery. Anyway, for how this episode takes place after the events of the first episode, and this leads to Omni-Man, in other words, Mark's father hiding on what he actually did with the Guardians, really proves to me onto why he's really one of the most menacing villains in this season, at least. I can easily tell you for a fact that after watching him killing the Guardians can really make him a lot more different compared to how he was portrayed when it comes to his relationship with his son Mark. Since we've already learned that he's actually the antagonist in this series, despite the fact that he mostly has feelings towards his family, this really instantly reminds me of the first Iron Man movie that I just reviewed in this month, where Tony Stark reveals his secret in front of everyone. But unlike Tony Stark revealing his secret as Iron Man, we completely know that Omni-Man is the antagonist, but no one around him gets the information. Yes, this episode is mostly centering around Mark as Invincible while getting used to his powers, but with this being mostly about his father being the antagonist, I feel like they put all the focus on Invincible while he goes some character development, while Omni-Man, his father, will lead to one of the most brutalist battles in any other cartoon or superhero show in general. Let me just say this right now, I did see the final battle between Omni-Man and Invincible, and considering that this led to so many memes around every other franchises, this show really had the best when it comes to the writing decisions, mainly for its characters and plots. When it comes to the army in this episode, the Flaxans about to take over the planet Earth, I have to admit that they're mostly a plot point for the main characters to give some kind of development, because Omni-Man is still in the hospital recovering, and Invincible along with the other sidekicks are trying to stop the army from taking over. There's really nothing else to discuss other than they're mostly a plot device for the characters to get some kind of development, but to be quite honest, I really think that they really knew how to make these characters a lot more interesting because of these antagonists in this episode. Since we get the introduction of Eve and Lex in this, I have to admit that they really knew how to make these characters really stand out from the Guardians from the last episode. Granted, the Guardians are much more experienced, but considering that they all got killed because of Omni-Man, jeez, it's going to be a lot more confusing and a lot more unbelievable to see what Omni-Man is going to do with these cast of characters if he gets his hands on them. All I can say is right now is the fact that these characters really give a good impression once you see them for the very first time after the events of the previous episode. Adam, which is Eve, is mostly a supporting character, but also mostly a love interest towards Invincible. And considering what Lex does in the following episode, I really don't blame her going out with Mark in this. Because let me just say this right now, Mark is a much more respectful character, especially with his development, a lot more complex the more he realizes that Omni-Man, his father, was the one that killed the Guardians. Granted, when it comes to relationships like these, I'm mostly biased, but I have to admit that even if I didn't watch more moments between these two characters, aside from the interactions after Eve's breakup with Lex, I still think that they really knew how to make this development a lot more better once they come face to face with Omni-Man. But then again, I've already witnessed the ending of the final episode, so I'm going to assume of what's going to end up happening in the later seasons. It could easily be a change of these characters getting killed or working together with Omni-Man. I know they're not going to do something by killing these characters because that will be a bit too far unless they actually figure out some other way to make an interesting twist. But I'm pretty sure that they've already did the twist involving Omni-Man, so I doubt doing this twist twice will be a good idea once we completely see it coming. So if there's anything else I can address about this episode, it's mostly the fact of how I appreciate Mark's struggle, especially his struggle in the previous episode on becoming a superhero. He is still trying to improve on becoming a superhero, and unlike other superheroes I've seen like Spider-Man, I can easily tell that with this world building, it really feels like it's mostly The Incredibles, but on the other hand, The Incredibles were mostly about the heroes facing society on them being completely banned from the public. But with this universe being mostly graphic and a lot more serious when it comes to how these characters are dealing with these situations, I can easily assume that Invincible will probably be one of the most interesting developed superheroes in these types of cartoons. Since each episode is 40 minutes long and they put most of the focus on Mark in this compared to the previous episodes, I really think that they really need to make Mark a lot more understanding of how the world building of this show is when it comes to the villains and mostly the other supporting characters. And considering that I didn't even talk about all the supporting characters as the series continues, I really think that they really need to save the best moments for later episodes, since that they want to put most of the one time on a sophisticated character. And every time I completely look at some of these moments right here, it really proves to me that Mark just needs to have so much experiences on becoming a superhero. While his father is trying to give him so many lessons on becoming a powerful superhero, it really feels like he's trying to adjust to what it feels to becoming something very important, but also being his own character. All I have to say is right now is that people really wanted Invincible to be like Omni-Man, but at the same time, it's not really possible when Omni-Man completely leaves and goes on with his own duties in the finale of the first season. Mark, on the other hand, actually cares about his father a lot more than his father thinks. So I really think that they really did a good job on trying to make the scenes between him and his father probably one of the best in this show. Even though that this only leads to Invincible hanging out with the other characters when it comes to stopping evil, I still think that if you completely look at these moments before we get to these moments, you can easily tell that Omni-Man is just trying to make sure that his identity involving his nature against the other characters, mainly the Guardians, can really prove how much of a serious threat he is once we completely see more episodes settling around his development. Believe me when I say this, is that Omni-Man is mostly a pawn for what these characters can do, but what these characters can do, unlike Omni-Man, is not betray the public. And when we see him fighting an army from a different planet, it really proves to us that he's trying his hardest to make sure that no one finds out about him or what he really did. But every time you can really see his true nature, he becomes a lot more menacing the more you can really see him on screen in later episodes. And for someone who hasn't watch all the other future episodes to know that Nolan is truly gonna do something really devastating. The more you completely see his development towards his interactions with other characters. I have to admit that even if I did saw the final battle, it really affects Mark a lot more, but at the same time, he still respects his father regardless. Which is why I consider this an important episode. Even if Nolan doesn't get a lot of development compared to the previous episode, you need to understand that this show is trying to put so much attention on other characters, including Mark. With that being said, this episode is probably one of the best when it comes to watching of how these characters are executed. Granted, when it comes to later episodes, they're going to be superior towards this, but let me just say this right now, I'm only reviewing this episode for mostly the introductions towards other characters like Eve, Rex, among others. So I really recommend you watching the show mainly from the first season before getting to the second and third seasons once they come out. But keep this in mind, this is way more graphic when it comes to the violence, so watch at your own risk like I did upon watching the first and second episode. Granted, it's gonna be mostly a pain to sit through, but considering that I went through so many other cartoons in this decade while also looking at new cartoons I haven't watched, I need to give this show a chance. I give this episode a 7.5 out of 10.
Let's get this started again. Me and my whole